age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? I'm glad everybody is here. I can see so many people in the chat already. We got Sound Engraver, Pedro's here, Sequential Treasures, Greg, Tony, a lot of people. Someone just give me a shout out to let me know that you can hear me, and I will start blathering away. All right. Zach Dan is here too. Great to see. Great to see. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Michael. All right. So tonight I want to talk about fandoms. Well, before I start, I should let everyone know, of course, that you just watched the trailer for Crom the Destroyer, one of the trailers anyways. I will play the secondary trailer as an outro, and link for Crom the Destroyer is in the description, and for the Valiant Heroes also, which is my superhero graphic novel, in the description. I am powering through trying to get the last issues of those orders for the Valiant Heroes out, hopefully within the next week. And then I'll move on to lost books if anybody's lost their books. So what I usually do with these live streams, I just want to have a fun topic. Usually I talk about comics. I do much more serious things on the weekends, but I want to talk about fandoms today. And as I said, usually I take about 15-20 minutes and just go off of my topic, and then I get to the live, to the chat, and see who's here, give everybody a shout out, and see if you have any questions for me. And you can ask me any questions you want about my books, about my other videos on the weekends, about this video, anything you want in the chat. I just ask that you put a question mark after it, or tag me in it, or both, so that I know you're talking to me instead of someone else, and that way I can answer your question. So I wanted to talk about fandoms, and really I've been going back and forth in my mind about this over the last little while. And when I mean the last little while, I mean since I've started producing comics. But the thing was that I've always collected comic books, and we used to have comics. Like, I can't even remember a time when there wasn't comics in my house, because I have older brothers and they got a, package, I don't know, a collection of old comics from somewhere. I don't know where, but there's always comics there. And I always collected comics. It was kind of my thing, but I was never really the kind of person to be part of a fandom. I really wasn't. And I suppose let me put up something in the background. So, well, I love that Wolverine and Spider-Man cover, and those are two major fandoms right there. So let's leave that up for now, but I'll give you some more visuals in a little bit. But the thing is that even when I went to the comic shop, it was like, I don't know about this. I mean, I would sit there and go through the long boxes and go through the stacks of comics that were new, and I'd listen to the guys that were talking, and I did not really want to be part of much of that conversation. I'm really glad that I found John's long box, actually, because John is a great guy. He talks comics in a way that, is just great, if you ask me. I finally found my people. You people here are my people, and John is one of them, certainly. But the thing is, like, when I went to my comic shop and bought comics, and this is back in the 80s and 90s, and even into the recent times when I started to go back to the comic shop, I'd hear conversations and I really just didn't want to be a part of them. I don't know. It's like the fact that I remember the guys these guys, some of them that worked at the comic shop and things like that, talking about the let's just say the reproductive habits of Superman. And I'm going, that's just too much information, guys. I really don't need to hear that. I really don't. But anyways, that's my kind of feel about fandoms. It's that, you know, I'm on the periphery of these things because I used to, and I still do consume a lot of older comics. And I did get into buying newer comics over the last, 5 years or so, although I've gotten out of that since my comic shop closed. But the thing is, I bought massive amounts of comics, but I was never really a part of a fandom. And the same thing with anime. I have watched a lot of anime in my time, going back to like the 70s. And it's so much so that about, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, I went on to, I think it was my anime list. I think there might be a list up there with my name on it still, but I spent hours trying to pick out all of the anime that I've actually watched. And after hours and hours of clicking on yes, this, yes, that, I could not see myself getting to the end of that list. That is to say, I could not see myself finding every last anime that I watched, and I wasn't even halfway through after doing it for hours. But the thing was, I'd never been a part of the anime fandom. And when I started to dip my toe into that and saw how toxic that the anime fandom is like, yeah, no thanks. I don't want to be a part of that. I really don't. I love these stories, and it's the same with comics. I love these stories, but I don't need to be part of a fandom. And that's the thing. And I learned this a long time ago too. It was probably in the 90s when I decided to actually look up the definition of fan, because, if you know me, I'm a guy with a collection of dictionaries now, because, people keep on redefining things into ridiculousness. But anyway, I would look things up. That would be my first step. Go to the dictionary, look up the word origin and what it means and all that kind of stuff. And I looked up fan, and I learned that it was the short form of fanatic. And I went, wait a second, I don't want to be a fanatic about these things. I really don't. I mean, I suppose you could say that there are things that I am fanatical about, if you want to put it that way. I mean, there are higher principles in my life that, I would give my life for. I would, be a fanatic for my family. I would give my life for my family. Even considered a long time ago when I was, a young teenager, becoming a soldier and possibly giving my life for my country. Quite honestly, at that point, the deciding factor was, are there any honorable wars left to fight? And that was the question I answered. And the answer really was no. So that's why I didn't go in that route. But the thing was that those, three kinds of things, that's about all I would be considered myself a fanatic about, something I would give my life for. But these people who are part of fandoms, quite honestly, the thing is that they're fanatical about something that really doesn't deserve that much attention. It really doesn't. And the thing is, again, as I always say, story is a representation of reality. And the thing about those representations of reality is the fact that I would say the best kinds of stories not only lean into that, but understand that you're speaking to an audience that has a devotion to something bigger than themselves. And that's what I find is the problem with fandoms. You have these people and they're fanatical about something that you just shouldn't be fanatical about. And the reason why is because they're not fanatical about the things that are fundamental and that they should actually be attracted to, that they should actually consider giving their life for, higher principles. I don't care what kind of higher principles you might derive, like your religion, you can give your life to that, or you give your life for your family, or you give your life for your country. These people who put their entire effort into a fandom, they don't have that. It seems to me anyways, since they don't have those higher principles, higher callings, these actual things, these tangible and really objective things that you could give your life for, they pour everything into a make-believe story of one kind or another, whether it be Marvel Comics or Harry Potter or, I don't know, Doctor Who. It doesn't matter. But really, that's what I see in fandoms. And my question really is, why? Not only why would you do that? No, I understand why they would do that, because of well, as I'm going to talk about, I think this Saturday, the tyranny of relativism and all that kinds of stuff that would make people, forget about all the things that are true and real and beautiful. But the thing is that why would you do that? And why would you pursue these people as a base? Why would you pursue these people as your customer base? And that's really where I was going with it when I was thinking about this question. They're not the kind of people that you need to attract as part of a customer base. It's really not. You don't want people that are fanatical about your product. I don't see that as being a stable customer base. I want people for myself. Anyways, this is why my channel is based around heroes. It's not based around comics. And that's why I can shift from comics to television to movies to anything else really around entertainment, because I'm talking about stories. Why? Because it's based around heroes. And even literary interpretations of heroes I go into every once in a while, things like that. Because the heroism, true heroism, again, as I always talk about, this paragon of virtue, the four virtues that you can go back to, well, at the very minimum Aristotle, and find the listing of those four virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and all that kind of stuff. These are ideas based upon a much bigger concept, a fundamental concept, and is something that speaks to the human spirit, to the human nature, that which makes you human. And that's what you need to appeal to. Now, I understand that you want fans in so much as you're going to have people who really like your material, and you got to concentrate on giving those people what they want. But the initial burst of what you should be doing is to appeal to everyone, because you're appealing to the larger principles that make life worth living and sometimes dying for. And that's where you need to put your target at, if you ask me. And from that, you might get people who are fans of your material, and you might use them as a stable basis for what you want to do to tell stories. But that's not where you should go initially, if you ask me. And that, I think, is one of the major problems with modern comics, is because that's what they've been doing more and more. Again, I would say since the end of the 80s. I always talk about this on my live streams here. Okay, I'll put up something in the background before I blather on anymore, just to give you guys some beautiful comic material to look up. Let's see, what do I got here? I'll put up something here. Here we go. But this is what I talk about, the difference, and I've been talking about this the last couple of months, the difference between, I would say, comedy in the 80s and the 90s. I see a significant difference in it. And that would be the same with the difference between comedy in the 50s and the 60s, if you ask me. And as I said before, many times, I think that the difference is that, yes, in the 80s you had these, and in the 50s too, you had these campy stories and these campy ways of telling a story, and these campy ways of telling jokes and things like that, because there was no in group and there was no out group. There was no group that you were making fun of. Where in the 80s, you would have a joke and it was meant for everyone so that everyone could laugh. In the 90s, you started off with, there's a joke for certain people about certain other people so that one group would laugh at the other. And again, that's whittling down your audience, if you ask me. And that has continued over the decades since the 90s. So much so that we get comics now that are targeting, comic buyers of the alphabet people, which is like a sliver of 3% of the population at best. That's no good. That makes no sense at all economically. And that's the kind of people that they're targeting. That's their fandom. That's what they want as a fandom. I've been covering Marvel Comics in depth for the last 6 years of my channel, going to the Marvel website and picking off podcasts from them and listening to what they have to say and the people that they want to attract and the things that they want to do, following them on Twitter, and all of this ridiculous nonsense that they're putting up there, or they have been over the last 5-6 years. They've stopped doing most of it by now, but putting up cooking shows and cosplay shows and all these how to make cosplay and all these kinds of things. And literally, these are the fandoms that they want to attract. And that's the problem. If you're trying to attract a fandom instead of trying to just shotgun it for everyone, and then try to whittle it down a little bit here and there so that you appeal more and more to those people who respond, then you got yourself a problem. And especially if you got yourself a problem with these people who are fanatics about your material that isn't real. There's something wrong there. If you have these people who don't have a fundamental basis in ideas that are real, and you start applying unreal concepts to their mind as they are reading your material, because we're talking about stories, there's something's going to break there. Those two things are not compatible, and they're certainly not compatible when you want them to exchange money for your product. And I find that's the problem with fandoms, and it can work both ways. I'm not saying that it's only these people who are on the left wing, these heavy progressives, and the people who Marvel wants them to follow. It works the other way as well. If you have people, although it's, I would say, harder to get people on the right wing who don't have a basis in reality, because that's really what you're supposed to be. If you're a conservative on the right wing, you're supposed to be based in reality. That's what based means, based in reality. But there is a strain of that as well. It was kind of like when I ran across that, I don't even know what it's called. I'm sure someone in the comments will put it up there. But there was probably about 10 years ago or more, there was, I would say probably 15 years ago, there was a documentary that came out. I don't know what it was called off the top of my head, but it was basically George Lucas has destroyed my childhood. And you had all these people who are part of the Star Wars fandom talking about how, well, not just Star Wars, but basically everything, everything George Lucas, and I guess that would include Indiana Jones as well. But I mean, they were talking about Star Wars, they were talking about Indiana Jones, all that kind of stuff, and how the prequels and then the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just destroyed these franchises and destroyed their childhoods. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I understand what you're saying, because I hated the prequels. They were garbage. I hated the Crystal Skull. It was garbage. Yes, it lessened what those franchises actually were in my mind. But to go so far as to say that it ruined your childhood, there's something wrong there. I mean, there's something wrong with that kind of mindset. And I could see it right there. It's like, you're taking this a step too far. And I think it's because, again, these people have no actual basis of reality in their own lives. Again, something that they would be fanatical about, that they should be fanatical about. That is to say, something that is much bigger than them, that they could give their lives for, either living or dying. And because they don't have that, they make these fandoms basically their religion. And not only that, but their fandoms of, let's say, Star Wars is their religion, or Harry Potter or something like that. And they're the Pope of their religion. So anything that doesn't fit in with what they think about this story is something you get excommunicated for, is something that, you are a heretic because you don't think the way I think. And most of these people, again, it's all about, you destroyed my childhood. It's a childish way of thinking, because they're basing all of their ideas on how they felt as a child. And there's no wonder that these people never grow up, and these people never actually become adults, no matter how old they are. And Marvel and DC and other kinds of Disney, I guess would just say as a blanket, are trying to attract these people because they have more and more excess money, because they don't spend it on children or other things. And it's like, no, that's the exact opposite way you should be going, literally. And that's the exact opposite way I think that Disney should have gone, or had used as their basis since the beginning. It was, we're putting out this material for people who are well-rounded and grounded in reality, and just want to have some fun and just want to have a laugh, things like that. So to me, I don't know, I go back and forth about this every once in a while in my own mind, but that's why I think that fandoms are not healthy, and not a healthy way to expand what you want to do as a storyteller, and in selling your stories. And I might tick some people off, but I kind of actually think that the Ripperverse is kind of like that. I mean, if you want to look at something that's on the right hand side of the spectrum, it's that I'm not entirely sure you're selling people good stories. you're selling them an idea of a fandom that's not a left-wing fandom, and that's it. Hopefully that's going to change. He's got better writers writing for him, like Chuck Dixon. But again, it's not a sustainable model. Anyways, I've gone on for more than 20 minutes here, so I'll probably see if I can catch up in the comments now, because again, usually I think that I'm doing great and that I'm way ahead of the comments, and then I go, uh-oh, I just realize that I am way behind. So let's see who is here first of all, and then I'll see if we have any questions for me in the comments. Let's see. Tony, as I said, is here. Greg is here. Sequential Treasures is here. Pedro is here. Sound Engraver is here. Always give a shout out to Sound Engraver. She has a great channel. You should click on her icon and go on over to Sound Engraver's channel. Sequential Treasures. Michael is here. Let's see. Zach Dan. Sequential Treasures has a point here. Let's bring that up. He says, only problem with fandoms is that they know the source material better than the narcissist making it, and one thing narcissists hate most is getting shown up as fools, which many modern creators are. Yeah, but again, the thing is, again, I would say what I talked about there at the end is that it's their religion. These fandoms are their religion, and so, and not only their religion, but they're the pope of their religion. So their interpretation of how things work is the actual fact. Sometimes you have continuity, and sometimes you have continuity in your head, and the two are not the same. So yeah, that's a problem. Zach Dan is here, as John said. Zach Dan giving a drive-by blessing. Good to see you here, Zach Dan. Let's see. Michael Sound Engraver, Zach Dan, Pedro. Let's see. Scrolling down, see if anybody has any questions. Pedro says, the problem with fandoms is the wider, the more bad people that shouldn't be there it is in a major or minor extended. I think you might have been cut off there. But I think I see your point, Zach Dan. Because again, this is why I go back and forth. It's like, I know that I talked about this myself. I've done videos about the fact that, yeah, you need to protect a fandom these days just because people are going to use it for something that it shouldn't be used for. But at the same time, I'm still of the mind that you should throw your net out as wide as possible through, again, these objective ideas that are basically part of human nature. And that's why you end up pulling people into things like comics when they're not avid comic readers. That's how you extend your audience. Let's see. Scrolling down. Tony is here. Tony says, I miss the old days when the normies had yet to take over my hobby, the pre-Big Bang Theory days. Yeah. Again, the thing is that not every story is going to appeal to everyone. And so things like comics, they were once for a small group of people, even though they cast their nets wide. And I talk about this, and I do this partly in my own books, but the old, let's say, even early 80s, but certainly 70s Marvel and DC, they used to introduce the characters every time a book would start. I mean, the X-Men, the first John Byrne X-Men, for a couple of years, every time they'd start a book, they would introduce every character just with a one line. And DC would usually do it just by putting their floating heads on the cover or on the inside cover and then giving you their names. But the thing is that it's not for everybody. I understand it's not for everybody, but that doesn't mean that you can't cast your net out there far and wide for everybody. But at the same time, you have to recognize that you're serving a small group of people. And that's what comics used to be, and other, storytelling mechanisms. So yeah, again, there is a tightrope there that I haven't quite figured out what the line of back and forth is. So it's a good thing you pull that up, Tony. Let's see. Scrolling down. Michael says, anime fandom has gotten more toxic over the last 10 to 15 years since it's gotten more mainstream. Again, I completely agree. You probably said that, Michael, before I talked about anime and how I found it to be toxic as well. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Zach Dan says, not to be preachy, but the human heart is an idol making machine. It should be aware, one should be aware of that tendency. Uh, yeah, yeah. I always go back to what is it, Plato, Plato's laws, where he talks about how the source of basically evil is a person with excessive self love. So yeah, that would be quite along the lines of what you just said, Zach Dan. The heart is an idol making machine. Let's see. Tony says, excuse me, if you're holding, excuse me, if you're holding a mock funeral for Star Wars, you've gotten a bit far into your fandom. Yeah. And here's the thing again. It's like when I watch, I don't know, I haven't watched any of the As videos for a while. And he does have some points. He goes on a little bit too long. I think he's joined up with Ripa right now. So I don't know what's going on there. But the thing is, again, I know that he has a point, and I know that some of these things are just bad storytelling. But at some point, again, there's a line where it just goes into ridiculousness, quite honestly. And at some point, Richard Meyer has talked about this. There is a point of ridicule that you can bring into it where it's like, are you really going to concentrate that much of your life on this thing? And where that line is, I think we're still trying to figure that out. But because again, you got to have to protect this thing, which is, again, I would say comics are works of art, honestly. And you can't have people just defacing works of art, things of beauty. You just can't. You have to put your foot down sometime and somewhere. But where that is, I guess it might be something that we determine in the future, or it might be something that's determined in different ways for different situations. Let's see. Greg. Greg says, I have the first Webster's, my grandfather's, and Webster's second edition unabridged dictionaries. Very good. I always say go back to a dictionary that was probably printed at the very minimum before the 80s, 1980s, if you want any kind of definitions that are going to be what they should be, which is an extension of a logical proof. That's why dictionaries really, I think, were invented, as in you have to figure out what the thing is in itself before you can actually have an argument about it. Let's see. Sound Engraver says, the existential question is, if no one likes Star Wars, would you still like Star Wars? I would. I don't need to be in a group. I'm happy to love these things by myself. Yeah, I think I'm with you there, Sound Engraver, quite honestly, because every once in a while I come across a new thing and I get enthralled by a new thing by, I don't know, a month or maybe a couple of months or maybe even a year. But then I start to look at the thing outside of the artistic expression of the thing. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to go that far. I should never actually go that far because I don't like what it is becoming when I go that far. And I don't know, maybe it's a selfish part of me, but I'm just here for the story. I'm a story junkie. I am really. And I'm just here for the story. And if you're giving me a good story, that's great. And my mind is working on the story. And I think it's a fabulous story. Every once in a while, you come across people who expand that story for you just by giving their own take on it. But mostly you get people who just destroy the story making, well, the miraculous nature of story making. Let's put it that way. Let's see. Scrolling down, Zach Dan says, I get some good comments here. I don't know if we're ever going to get to the bottom. Zach Dan says, when you don't believe in absolute truth or in human nature, then you try to get mass appeal by going to the lowest common denominator rather than to transcendent reality. Zach Dan, that is a beautiful way to put that. Thank you very much. That is exactly what I was trying to get at. Exactly. And that's part of the reason why, certainly, why I hate these books that have, well, TNA basically. And I go on, it's really rampant on Indiegogo. No, not Indiegogo, on Kickstarter, because every book has a girly mag cover on it. And it's like, do you need to put that there? I mean, if you want to draw a girly magazine, go and draw a girly magazine. Sell it. Go ahead. I'm sure there's plenty of people that will buy it. But you're appealing to the lowest common denominator if you're trying to sell the story, and that's how you sell it. It's like cheating as far as I'm concerned. You're not actually looking at people who want to read your story either visually or, through the words. You're just selling it because you have skin on the cover more than would be allowed, in the grocery store or stuff like that. And to me, that's a cheat. You're not actually selling what you think you're selling at that point. But yeah, that's the whole point. They're appealing to the lowest common denominator. Why? Because they don't know how to appeal to transcendent reality. They don't know how to appeal to greater truths. They just don't. Scrolling down. Da-da-da. Let's see. Serge, how you doing? He says, if you want to turn someone into a fanatic, threaten what they care about. Yeah, I mean, but as I said, there are some things that you should be fanatical about, if you ask me, like the protection of your family. I'm sorry, but be fanatical about protecting your family, things like that, and serving your family. Yeah, fanatical to the extent that that's what every good mother and father actually do. It's like, okay, this child is here now, or these collection of children. My life is going to be given up for them. That's fanatical, but that's being a good mother or a good father. Let's see, scrolling down. Ryan, how you doing? Ryan says, it appears to me that many of the comics and cartoon franchises are trying to build their fan base around occult beliefs such as witchcraft and voodoo while directly attacking fundamental Christianity. That is a really good point, Ryan. That is a really good point, because I've done a number of videos on my channel about these people, especially from Marvel, and they talk about witchcraft and tarot and all these kinds of things. And I even went into at one point when they were doing, what was it? I don't know. It was like Archie comics where they had these symbols, like witchcraft symbols and all that. And I'm not the only one who sees this stuff. I'm not the only one who is concerned about this stuff. I had Wes from Thinking Critical. It was probably a couple of years ago, and he reads a lot more comics than I do. And we haven't interacted for a little while, but we did for a long stretch there. And he basically said to me, RJ, this is not my thing to talk about, but you usually talk about these things. Can you read this book and just use it in one of your videos? Because it's disturbing how much of this occult nonsense that they're putting into these books. That's the basic gist of what he said. And I know, and I agreed with him. And yeah, that's a good way, Ryan, to put it. I had never thought of it that way. I had talked about strains of it. That's a good way to put it. And, I think the reason why they would do that is because, again, I'm talking about the selflessness of a human being and how selfish you should be. And Christianity does exactly base every principle upon that. The whole thing of Christianity is about love. God is love, right? And what is love? Well, love is willing the good of the other. The other. That's what you should be doing all the time, willing the good of the other. Not you, but the other. So it's selflessness, and they want to be selfish. So they got to get rid of Christianity because it's a fundamentally based on Christian ideas of selflessness, and they just want to be selfish. And that's why they go into everything that is the enemy of Christianity, which is why they go into, as you say here, witchcraft and voodoo and all that kind of stuff. I had never thought of it as directly as that, Ryan. Thank you for that comment. Let's see, scrolling down. Michael says, humans want to believe in something, so if you take away religion, people will invent something to take its place or choose something else to replace it with the state of a corporation. Yeah, I agree. We are believing creatures, and it's part of our human nature, and I don't even think that it's 100% has to do with believing things that are transcendent, things that are spiritual. It's the fact that with the way that our mind works, we have to believe things even within our objective corporeal reality that we live in order to get by at some point, because we don't have full information. So yeah, that's a good way to think about it, Michael, because we are believing machines in so much as Our brains work in that way, and we need something as a basis. And that's what I'm always talking about, the fact that you have a basis of good storytelling, and it goes back to these fundamental principles of reality. But these people, if you don't have a basis, it will drive you insane. It will. And these people are being driven insane because they have no basis in reality. Let's see. Scrolling down. Calliope is here. Says he's going to catch up. Very good, Calliope. See you in the future. Scrolling down. Let's see. Hondo, how you doing? Fan doesn't mean fanatical. That's just where the term comes from. Gay people aren't happy. A van isn't a caravan. What? Oh, okay. I see where you're going with that. A van isn't a caravan. Okay. Interesting way to put it. I'm just that was the word origin. I always start at the word origin. Pedro has a comment here. Says, RJ, what you are talking about is try to convince an extrovert to do introvert stuff. Exactly. I was thinking about it in those terms myself. I just didn't get to that point. And they will go crazy even trying to be alone with their thoughts. Quite honestly, you're right. Because that's the thing. For me, anyways, I'm an introvert. You might not guess that, but I am. And when I used to go to the comic store and spend hours there, because I would have hours to spend going through the long boxes, right? I was very introverted, as in it's just I even did a video about it at one point. It's like, leave me alone. I'm just looking for Conan comics that I don't have. Please leave me alone. And people in the comments were like, RJ, you're so strange. More normally it's about, paragons of virtue, and this one it's like, shut up, leave me alone. I'm looking for Conan. Anyways, but yeah, I'm an introvert, and I would think that reading and comics, anything that has to do with reading, attracts more the introvert than the extrovert. And I know you're going in the opposite direction with it, Pedro, but I would say that that's the thing that you have to watch out for. You're actually talking about introverted people when you are talking about a lot of kinds of storytelling and how to get it out to them. And maybe, perhaps, Pedro, I don't know, but you just flipped a switch in my head. Maybe that's where you cross the line, where you have something that has been a storytelling mechanism like comics, which was a niche thing, and then the switch gets flipped, and all of a sudden it becomes something that is mainstream, and it starts to disintegrate because it's not built for the mainstream. Why? Because it goes from serving a basis of people who are introverts to serving a basis of people who are extroverts. Wow, Pedro, that is a really good thought. I might actually do a video on that at some point. I got to keep that in my head. Thank you very much. Let's see. That's why I love doing these live streams and seeing what you all have to say. It just gives me so much new perspective on everything. Let's see. Honduran, I think they're being hyperbolic with the ruined childhood. Honestly, I don't know if you actually watched that documentary, Honduran, but I really don't think they were. I quite honestly don't think they were. Let's see. Scrolling down. Manny is here. Manny, we're just talking about how fandoms sometimes ruin the thing that they're actually passionate about. Let's see. Okay. I am going to put something up in the background. I know I'm going to lose my place when I'm going to come back here and see if I can figure out where I am, but it's not going to work. Let's put some of the beautiful women in here from last week. Let's see. Go back to comments. Figure out where I was. Apologies. Just give me a second. Scrolling up. Here we are. Let's see. Serge, the crazies dictated the directions of red, white, black, and yellow's development. It died an ignoble death and dragged the company down with it. That was never one of, well, I don't know if you would consider, I'm a anime snob. I wouldn't really consider that an anime. But yeah, I know enough about the show that I think that you are correct. I couldn't say for sure, but it's that problem again with how many people are going to use this thing that is supposed to be a good storytelling mechanism for something else. I think that's what happened to to that show. Sequential Treasure says, but what do you do when people making the entertainment aren't grounded in reality? Can you expect them to create works that are? No, you can't. And that's the thing. Again, I always go back to, let's see, what is it? Romania, as they were part of the communist bloc. This is why I always go back to ideas like that. The Romanians are a stiff-necked people, to say the least, and they could see the writing on the wall that the USSR was going to disintegrate. And so what did they do? They started to create culture, which was underground culture, because if it wasn't part of what the party wanted, then it was illegal. But they started to create underground culture for a very specific reason, knowing that the entire system was going to fall apart because it was ridiculous. And they needed something as a basis of Romanian culture and heritage still to be there when the whole thing fell. And that's why I think people need to create now more than ever, because we are those creators. We are those small we'll say underground, not backwater, underground Romanian creators in North America right now, waiting for this system to collapse once again. You can't expect grounded in reality entertainment from the people who are in charge right now. You just can't. Which is why you should support your alternative media, if you ask me. And if you want, again, shameless plug here, my links for my three graphic novels are in the description. 2 superhero graphic novels and 1 fantasy graphic novel, which I bring everything back to the basis of true heroes and the principles of true heroism being paragons of virtue. Let's see. Tony says, RJ, are you a fan of DC's Kingdom Come miniseries? I don't, let's say, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm going to hum and haw about it because the art is spectacular, obviously, but I hate Mark Waid's work so much. At the very least, he had a collar on him at that point, and he was able to tell a story that made some kind of sense. And since it was an Elseworld story, because it was basically built as an Elseworld story, I would take it as a good Elseworld story, but not as a good DC story. I know it's splitting hairs, but that's about the best I can do with that question. Let's see. Sound Engraver says, fandoms have actually hurt culture. We have fans now making money off of getting mad at garbage, but that very thing is propagating more garbage. It won't get better until fans walk away. Again, I think that's what I was trying to get at to Sound Engraver, is the fact that we need to start casting our net into the entire culture, not focusing on one group or another, obviously. And the whole identity politics groupthink is just destroying it even faster. But, create something that you believe at the very least, or hopefully have some research to back it up, that the entire world could actually read and enjoy, or listen to and enjoy. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. Garkin. When Stan Lee and Jack Kirby started to create superheroes like Spider-Man and the Hulk, this was a great time for having iconic superheroes, but now we have many superheroes who are not interesting. Well, definitely. I agree. And I think that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created a whole lot of interesting superheroes because they were dealing with a lot of, let's say, well, I hate to use the word intersectional because it means something completely different these days, but an intersection of so many different cultures within the very specific place where they were, which was New York at that time. And those cultures were coalescing and starting to become the melting pot of America, and their ideas were coming together. And you had the ability to create so many unique stories that, again, since the melting pot was working its magic to bring these people together, even though they weren't technically that together. When you listen to Jack Kirby and how everybody was in their own little ghettos and had their own gangs and fought with each other, and stuff like that happened, but they were close enough so that they could each understand the ways of storytelling and the ideas of America. And I think that's part of the reason why they were so good at what they did. Scrolling down. Honduran also says, you can talk about how cringe fandoms are without the try to do etymology meeting. Okay. Let's see. Scrolling down. Honduran also says, normies didn't take over comics. They just gave them enough power and money to make slightly bolder choices, which would have come a few years later regardless. Again, to me, it was just giving them enough rope to hang themselves, because to me, comics really just went off the rails, second half of the 90s, as far as I'm concerned. Scrolling down. Honduran also says, liberals have always been in charge of comics and movies and such. Well, here's the thing, Honduran. I'm not entirely sure that that's correct. Maybe. But I'm just thinking back to one of the interviews that I usually go back to. Is the interview with Bobby Chase. She was in the mid 90s, one of the editors in chief at Marvel, because it was at that time divided, I think, into 5 sections, and each section had its own editor in chief. But I talked to Chuck Dixon about this, and he says, oh, that story is hooey. Even though she says it, because he knows her. He knows Bobby Chase. He worked for Bobby Chase at Marvel. But Bobby Chase told the story, I think it was like four years ago, when she was doing an interview with Women of Marvel. And she says when she got into Marvel Comics in the 80s, it was probably late 80s, I think it was 88, she was told to check her liberal politics at the door, because her liberal Northeastern United States politics at the door. Why? Because, as she relays, that they told her that the main basis of the people who read our comics are Midwestern conservative people. And that's who you need to think like in order to actually create comics. Now, again, I don't know. Are you going to go with Bobby Chase, coming straight from her mouth, that this is what happened to her? Or go with Chuck Dixon, who worked with Bobby Chase, saying that's not what Marvel was like? No one ever said that kind of thing. I don't know. But if she is correct, then I would say you might have had people who are liberal-minded in charge of comics, but not people who produced liberal-minded comics, if that was the case. Scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. Jay is here. How you doing, Jay? He says, not gonna lie, fandoms are the reason I kept my love for superheroes to myself for so long. Never liked confrontation about art. Again, yeah. I mean, I talked to John over at John's Logbox a lot about how he grew up, and he grew up in a city. I grew up in the country. He grew up in New York City. So, he talks about how he hid the fact that he liked comics, and that, he basically had 1 or 2 people that he would pick out, and they finally learned that they like comics, and he had people to talk about comics to. To me, I had no one ever to talk about comics to, up until, I started my channel, really. And that was 6 years ago. Why? I had my brothers, and I could talk to my brothers, and there was a couple of friends of my brother had, or other people that collected comics that I bought them from, or usually there would be my brother's friends or my friends who would start to buy comics and then just get out of it and sell me their collection, things like that. But yeah, I never really had anyone to talk about comics to. And again, part of that was that I'm not entirely sure I wanted to talk to a lot of those people in the comic shop. I just didn't. So I know where you're coming from, Jay. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Oh yeah, Michael. Yeah, this is kind of something that I want to talk about this weekend, I think, Michael. But yeah, I think they started changing definitions for works in words in dictionaries in the mid 1960s. Depends on what kind of dictionaries you're looking at, Michael, which is why you got to go back to a good dictionaries. And I always, again, I have collections of dictionaries. I have collections of dictionaries from the 1800s. Go back to those. I love looking through, again, etymology and finding how much a word has changed over the years, because again, look it up in several dictionaries. My usual pattern is start with a good solid dictionary, look up the word, and then look up its word origin, usually within the Latin or the Greek, because I also have Latin and Greek dictionaries, and they're giant tomes. But anyways, Let's see. Scrolling down. Da, da, da. Greg says, back in the 70s, girls had sparkly pencils, and boys had basketball cards. Now kids have tons of stuff. They're too spoiled. Not going to disagree with that at all, Greg. Not going to disagree with that at all. I think that means that we're going to, if you want to sell stories and the kinds of things that are going to be patterned around stories, that's a lot of different kinds of entertainment. You're gonna have to do it in a completely different way. And again, it's a way that tugs at the idea of fandom, but doesn't rely on fandom nor the creation of fanatics. Quite honestly, that's where I'm going with. I'm trying to build what I'm doing with storytelling and making comics and graphic novels a a business, and so I think about these things a lot. But yeah, that's one of the things. There's just so much out there today, and people are spoiled. I wouldn't just say kids are spoiled. People are spoiled. Because honestly, I go back to like the 70s and the 80s. It was like you got to watch maybe one or two things during your week which were specifically tailored to you. That was it. Like one or two shows, maybe three or four if you were lucky. That was about it. Everything else was, well, it's on television. I'm going to watch it just because I have some time and I'm going to watch some television. It's not really what I want to watch, but that's it. So yeah, there's a big difference between 70s, even 80s and today. Agree 100%, Greg. Michael says, sex sells, but people have been using it as a crutch for their lack of talent or their own fears of or self-loathing. I agree. Scrolling down. Jay also says, don't know who brought it up, but whoever said they are using comics to promote anti-Christianity, thank you. I thought it was just me. No, it's not just you, Jay. And yeah, it was a great point. I say that one more time. That was a great point. Let's see. Marvel Comics should focus on good storytelling instead of political agendas. They should keep the characters for the fans they want. Yeah, again, well, I would say it's gotten to the point where fandoms have gotten so toxic that you have to start again at the very least. At the very least, let's say this is the way that you actually need to create a business and to focus on a fandom and maybe create it or let's say grow it. And the thing is that if that is the case, and again, I'm not saying it is, but if it is the case, it's gotten to a point where it's gotten so toxic that they must start again. You must scrap the entire thing and start again at, okay, we're going to put out stories, blanket for everyone, and start to build an actual fandom of people who actually like the characters and want to read the stories and will give us their money for it first and foremost. So yeah, let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down. Honduran says, everyone goes against Christianity. The occult stuff is just adding magi and stuff. Some go down internet holes and add way more than needed. Okay. But yes, there is definitely an anti-Christianity bias today. Well, here is a good comment that Sarge says, heroes have to have sex appeal. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between appreciating a beautiful woman and lusting after a beautiful woman. As far as there's the line for me, right? I can look at beautiful women in comics and say that needs to be there. It's great that that's there. And I did. That's what last week's really live stream was about. That you need to have beautiful women, and this appeal to the what is it? What is it I talked about last week? The fundamental form of masculinity and femininity. Yeah, sure, that needs to be there, but that's not going into the vice of you know creating lust within your readers so that's why they're there instead of the story. There's a line there, if you ask me. Elijah, how you doing? Glad you're here. You made it to a stream. Glad to see you here. Let's see. Da-da-dum. I still don't know how to pronounce his name. I do apologize. I'll just go with the second name is Garkin. Garkin. What is your favorite Marvel comic story in the 70s? Favorite Marvel comic story in the 70s? Well, here's the thing. That's a really difficult question because you had DC, which in the 70s didn't have any continuity, and purposely so. Yeah, definitely listening to Jim Shooter, he talks about that. It wasn't until uh, you know um, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was what 81, where they actually started continuity. He did have a little bit of continuity, he says, in Legion of Superheroes before that, but that was about it. So there's no continuity there. And for Marvel, their continuity was very, very sporadic. It was something that they built their company upon, but it was sporadic in as much as you didn't have a Jim Shooter, a really good editor to say, yeah, you can't do that here. And so most of the comic stories within the 70s are one-shot stories, quite honestly. And I really don't know, because I think in terms of story arcs, that's where I'm going with that. I think of terms of story arcs as great stories instead of one-shot comics. And again, we're looking at a one-shot comic here right now, Spider-Man versus Wolverine. That was a great one-shot. But again, that was in the 80s, late 80s, I do believe, or mid to late 80s. But during the time of the 70s, they didn't have that. So that's a really, really difficult question. Quite honestly, off the top of my head, and I know I will probably revise this at some point, but off the top of my head, the thing that had the most continuity back then was Conan comics from Marvel. And they did have some great runs in the 70s. Um, and I can't think of one right off the top of my head because, to me, anyways, the Roy Thomas stories, the early Conan within the 70s, it was a giant story of an overarching march of Conan going in one direction, even though it was one shot, one shot, one shot, which is what it looked like. But in the late 70s, it got into some really good story arcs. But I can't think of any directly off the top of my head. Besides the Bleat storyline, which I think was very late 70s. That would be about it that I could think of off the top of my head. Scrolling down, scrolling down, scrolling down. Michael says red, white, black, and is it red, white, black, and yellow? I think it's black and yellow. Isn't an anime, but it tried to be. And that's one of the reasons the show went downhill so fast after the creator's unfortunate death. I didn't even know the creator had an unfortunate death. Okay. Let's see. Honduran says, Wiktionary says fan might even come from fancy, not fanatical. It says fanatical as the main origin, though. Okay. Elijah says, RJ, if you are an anime snob, are you familiar with the 1980s Saint Seiya? It's about armored warriors fighting the incarnation of the goddess Athena. Elijah, I watched that so long ago that it's probably a blur in my mind right now. Yeah. But I don't even remember when I watched that. But it's not exactly where I go with anime. I'm very much, I don't know. There's some really good mecha anime, and there's some really good fantasy anime, and there's some really good sports anime, and even slice of life and things like that. But there's a lot of bad anime. I could just lay that out there right now. And some of the hyper violent stuff within the 80s is just not good. I can't remember Saint Seiya whether it went in that direction or not. Fist of the North Star, I mean, is like, I could do without it. It was good to watch at the time, but if you get into stuff like, what was that crazy one where, I mean, there was some really off the wall stuff. But anyway, not familiar with it enough, Elijah, so that I remember much of the storyline. Let's see. Scrolling down. Michael probably remind me of Michael says Saint Seiya is super popular in Latin America because they got all 121 episodes while the US only got 53, so nobody knows what it is here in the US. Okay. Let's see. Da-da-da. So basically you're talking translations, I take it, Michael. Let's see. Da-da-da. I never knew this, but just bringing up I should not bring up tangential points at this point because we're already over an hour and I'm not even close to the bottom of the chat. But the funny thing is that I picked up, I don't know how true this is. It was just from a video I was watching, basically saying that Americans like their dubbed anime, whereas if you um, go to Europe, especially like France, it's all subbed, and they just love it more as a subbed um, genre of storytelling rather than a dubbed one. Uh, for me personally, I would say I'm so visual that it has to be dubbed or watch it in Japanese, one or the other. Let's see, scrolling down. Da-da-da. Scrolling down. No, let's see. Trey, how do you see the Hulk from your perspective? How do I see the Hulk from my perspective? The Hulk has gone through various incarnations throughout its life. It really depends on which incarnation you're talking about. The early Hulk was a Jekyll and Hyde character, and that's the story that it played off of. And as a Jekyll and Hyde character, and I have Jekyll and Hyde characters myself, I think that that's a very good way of telling a story and a very good way of exploring the darkness and the light side of a human being. So that's the way I would look at early Hulk. And then you got into 80s Hulk, which it got into whole boyhood trauma, and that boyhood trauma is the pain that he can never actually, you know, get rid of, so it becomes the source of his power. That's something completely different. And in that kind of a story, again, it's an exploration of a much deeper wound within a human being. And again, in that way of telling the story, I would say it has merit in exploring those ideas through the excess of power, all that kind of stuff. And even if you get into Mr. Fix-It, stuff like that, again, it's a darker side. But again, all these iterations of the Hulk are completely different. You could make just completely different characters, not Bruce Banner for every one, just Bruce Banner for the very first ones, and then skip to completely different characters, and it really wouldn't make a difference. So Hulk can be told in a good way when they use really good storytelling. That's all I can say. Because using like a Jekyll and Hyde way of telling a story is a really good fundamental way to tell a story, if you ask me. Honduran says, RJ, you said them defending the guy that tried to kill Trump are vicious. Trump did it to Baghdadi and Soleimani. What do you make of that? Does that make people defending his actions vicious? No, because, well, if Trump did it, again, there is a such thing as a just war. There is a such thing as just defense. There is, as far as I'm concerned. And just defense and a just war means that you have to apply the virtue of the station of well, I guess the station of your station. That doesn't work. You have to apply the virtue of your station in life to the ability to use virtues in a very specific way. I talk about virtues a lot, but there's some virtues that I don't talk about. There's virtues like magnanimity. I can't even pronounce it correctly. But being magnanimous is a virtue that can only be extended through kings. That's it. Why? Because you would be magnanimous through, let's say, building a giant cathedral, and only a king could do that. So that being said, I would say there are virtues also that only the poorest of the poor could actually access as well. But the thing is that these are separate and extra extensions of the normal virtues that I talk about, justice, fortitude. And so those things need to be extended to the station of the person in life. And a king has a different station than a normal human being, and his oath to defend his country, which is a good thing, and to defend the people around him. And I'm sorry, but the president is an elected king for 4 years. He really is. The ability to do that, to defend your country, does not make you vicious. That is actually a virtue of the defense of your country. as far as I'm concerned. And that's why there's a difference there. And that's why also, if you punch somebody in the face who's a random guy in the street and you get caught by the police, you might get fined, you might go to jail for a couple of days. But if you punch the president of the United States in the face, then you're going to jail for a long time. Why? Because you're not only attacking that person, but you're attacking the station that that person holds as well. And that's just a part of law. That's a part of natural law as well. And so this man did, and it's the next president. So he holds that station. He held that station for 4 years, and most probably, in my opinion, will be holding that station again for the next 4 years. So this person who attacked them, again, the viciousness of that attack is not just against the person themselves. That makes it vicious enough in itself, but makes it vicious 10 times more, 100 times more, because attacking the station of such a person as well. And that goes deep and heavy into Thomistic descriptions of the four virtues that I'm always talking about, and how all of this fans out into the recognition of divine law, and how it becomes the pattern for law that we create for ourselves as society, all these kinds of things. So yeah, there's no equivalency there as far as I'm concerned. And I know I'm not giving it justice, because trying to define what something like Thomas Aquinas talked about within the breaking down of virtues into smaller virtues is a Herculean task for volumes. Let's see. Tony says, RJ, have you read George R.R. Martin's Wild Card book series? No, I have not. I know people who love George R.R. Martin. I have people in my family who read his stuff and just fawn over it, but it's not my kind of thing from what I hear them describing. I have never read it. Honduran says melting pot is propaganda. Well, I would disagree. I don't think it's propaganda at all, because I lived through the reason why we fled from the place. We were part of white flight. We lived outside of a major U.S. city in the early to mid 70s, and we just left because there was a influx of foreigners that just wouldn't follow the law. They just wouldn't, and the legal system broke down in the place we were. We had to leave. We just had to. But those places are no longer like that. Why? Because they eventually get assumed into the way of thinking as an American. As far as I'm concerned, it is not a propaganda myth. You could change my mind on that with some heavy argument, but I'm not convinced of that right now. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Trey says, I would say DC Comics were the first to lead the charge on liberal left-leaning stories such as Denny O'Neill's Green Arrow. I also found it strange Denny writing The Question, the Objectivist. Yeah, I would agree with that, but at the same time, to me anyways, those stories were not for kids. I don't know. I really don't. There was a level of DC, and I agree that they did lead the charge on that kind of storytelling. There's no question in my mind about that, but they kept it to a minimum at the very least. And if they had kept it to a minimum, then we could say, well, you can have your opinion in comics and write comics your way, and I can have mine. But the left doesn't like that kind of thinking after they get to a certain point, at the very least. Let's see. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Zach Dan says, sounds like a funny rant. I'm not sure who he's talking to, but let's see. Sound Engraver says, thanks for the topic, RJ. Well, thank you very much for the super chat, Sound Engraver. As again, I'm going to plug Sound Engraver's channel. Go on over to Sound Engraver's channel and check out what she has to say. Let's see. I don't know how close I am, but to the bottom of this chat. So I'm going to see if I can move with a little more speed, since we're certainly past our hour now. Tony says, there are certain types that exist in anime that have always struck in my craw. It's the reason why I always keep it at arm's length. Yeah. as far as I'm concerned, there's progressivism and propaganda within anime as well. It's just, since it's Japanese, it sticks out like a sore thumb to me, so I can ignore it or just drop it whenever I feel like it. I don't get indoctrinated by it. Let me put it that way. Let's see. Ryan says, when are heroes justified in killing villains? David killed Goliath, but Saul lost his kingdom because he refused to kill the pagan king Agag after winning the battle. When are heroes justified in killing villains? It really, honestly, I don't know how to answer that question because there are so many different answers to that question, right? It would really depend on the form of storytelling that you're going for and who you're actually looking to tell the story to. As far as I'm concerned, if you're going to write comics for all ages, then you don't want to have every hero killing every villain, because younger kids just can't understand the nuances of what needs to be done sometimes. So you have to temper what you're going to do with who's going to be reading your books. But at the same time, I still think that things like the Iliad and the Odyssey are stories to read to children, and people die in horrible ways there. And it's graphically described as well. But again, there's a conversation to be had around that, but I don't think I can answer that question right off. I just can't. I'll say this much for myself, if I can answer it this way. I don't have my characters killing anybody because I write stories for all ages. And again, I don't think that some of these younger people who are going to pick up my books have the life experience to understand the nuance between what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and where that line for killing is, and what the difference is for things like a just war and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. Scrolling down. Excuse me. Sound Engraver says, people may feel overwhelmed that their stories won't be heard because of all the distractions. Make these stories anyway. Good art has to exist. I agree. Completely agree. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. There's a lot of discussion about Simon or David and Goliath in the comments here. I don't think it's for me, so I'm just gonna go and see if I can find more for myself. Michael, or questions for me. Michael says, I'm bugging out. Gotta say, red, white, black, and yellow is pronounced ruby. Yeah, I know. I just pronounce it the other way, just because. But yes, the colors are red, white, black, and yellow. It's the only way I know it's pronounced ruby, but when I read it in my mind, it's an acronym, right? I read out acronyms. Let's see. Scrolling down. Pedro brings up a good point I would agree with. Avatar did quite well and wasn't an anime, just imitate their style, but has its own soul. Agreed. Scrolling down. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, Honduran has a question here. RJ, we aren't at war with Iran, though. No, but you are justified in protecting yourself. That's as far as I'm concerned. And again, I would say, you're justified in protecting yourself and protecting your people, and to some extent, as a king, protecting the interest of your country. There's a fine line. I agree, but let me put it this way: the reason we're not at war is because people don't like war. If we were in any other point in history, we would be at war. I know that doesn't answer the question. It probably muddies the waters even more. But the thing is that the First and Second World War shocked people so much to their core, because of the loss of life, that they basically forbid anybody to actually fight an actual war. And as much as I detest war and think that war should not exist and that we should try to get away from war as much as possible, it led to a civilization where they decided to power through situations where war should actually have happened. Just pure and simple. Because, and I'm not talking because of the neocon way of thinking about war just because it's an extension of politics. No, I'm thinking of war as in this was unjust. You should not have allowed this injustice to continue to exist. And that's, I guess I would boil it down to that, there is a standard of justice that you can apply to all humanity. And I would say kings have the ability, at the very least. Whether you say they have the justification, that's another question. That would have to be applied to every different situation, but have the ability to extend that arm of justice these days all over the world. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. Honduran also says, I know what you mean, though, by the authority of the government to kill and stuff. Paul talks about it in Romans. If it was the deep state that did that, would it make it not vicious to you? No, again, if it's a subversion of the actual power of where the government gets its power from, and the people who are not in charge are making judgments of life and death that they have no business making, then yeah, it's a vicious thing. If you have the just ability to rule, then you have responsibilities, as far as I'm concerned. Let's see, one more for Hunter, and he says here, you don't have to answer. I was just taken aback last week when people were freaking out about it, like it's just an assassination. Yeah, I didn't understand that either. Just an assassination attempt. Let's see, scrolling down. I think I've gotten to the bottom of the chat. Elijah says, RJ, where is my Kit Fox story? I was just reminded. Sorry, Elijah, I'm not entirely sure. Where is my Kit Fox story? I don't know if you ordered one, Elijah, and haven't gotten anything yet. If you haven't, as I said at the first of this video, I am shipping out, trying to power through the last of the orders for this Valiant Heroes section of what I sold. Hopefully they'll all get out. The first batch of the regular orders, not the lost ones, will all get out within the next week and a half, maybe. Let's see, but I can't remember, Elijah, if you ordered just the Kit Fox story or not. All right, I think I've gotten to the end of the chat, and we've gone for about an hour and 17 minutes, so that's good enough for me. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much for participating in the chat. We had some really good comments today and really good discussion. Thank you, everyone, for putting those comments in there. I again, have to say, one of the reasons why I do this is to bounce these ideas off of you guys, because sometimes I work way much in my own head and I need some outside stimulus, and you guys certainly give me that with some very interesting ideas and pushback. So thank you very much once again for that. And for anybody who is just lurking there in the chat and don't know what everything here is about, well, we talk about just fun things about comics, and in general things that are just have to do with good entertainment, and we do that every once in a while here, every Wednesday night, every second Wednesday night, usually every second Wednesday night. Besides that, we do an interview, usually with someone, but this is all for love of comics and sequential art. And there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, and 1 fantasy, which is Crom the Destroyer, which I'm going to play the second trailer for in just a couple of seconds. But again, I want to thank everybody for showing up, and I will see you all again either on Saturday or next week. All right, bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.